All right. You guys ready to roll? All right, got a couple new faces in here. Just give us an idea of who we're dealing with. We're not going to go around the room and do names, but just to get an idea of type of people who we have here. Contractors, architect types. All right, one. Homeowners, one. All right, so we got a decent group. So this is, we got a lot of people signed up for this class, and we might have a few more people trickling in as we get going, but we don't want to keep you as it is Friday and towards the end of the day, so we're going to get down to it. So a couple of you guys have seen this video already. It is just as good as it was the first time that you watched it, but we're going to watch it again. It is a welcome to the folks that are new. It's kind of give you an idea of what we do here at RBD, and after that, we will get going.
Hi, and welcome to the second annual Pikes Peak Regional Building Open House. We appreciate you joining us today, and we hope you walk away from this class having learned a lot. We'll kick things off with a brief overview of what PPRBD is and what we do here in the Pikes Peak region. PPRBD was started back in 1966 by an intergovernmental agreement, or IGA, between El Paso County and the city of Colorado Springs. As the Pikes Peak region grew, so did we. Today, PPRBD not only services El Paso County and Colorado Springs, but Fountain, Manitou Springs, Monument, Palmer Lake, Green Mountain Falls, and the town of Woodland Park in Teller County. So what do we do? Well, we make sure contractors have the proper licenses to do work here in the Pikes Peak region and ensure all work is done in a code-compliant manner, from plan review and permitting to new construction, remodels, and re-roofs. Our goal is to keep our citizens safe through efficient and the consistent application of adopted codes and standards. We do that by reviewing and inspecting the design, construction, quality of materials, use, and occupancy of all buildings and structures under our jurisdiction.
One of the best things about regional building and the way that regional building operates is the same codes are in place all throughout El Paso County, and the same expectations occur all throughout El Paso County. So it doesn't matter where a building is built, whether it's in the city of Colorado Springs or way out east on the plains, the same criteria applies and the same level of expectations and service is there.
The department is governed by the Regional Building Commission, a 3-member governing body consisting of 1 county commissioner designated by the El Paso County Board of County Commissioners, 1 council member designated by the Colorado Springs City Council, and 1 elected official chosen by the other member jurisdictions served by PPRBD. Probably one of the biggest misconceptions about regional building is that we are the city or we are the county and that we get tax funding. That's actually not the case. We aren't the city or the county. We are a separate entity and we don't receive 1 dime of tax money. Instead, the department is completely funded through permit, plan review, and license fees. With that said, we are proud to say that our fees have not been increased in 11 years, and we have some of the lowest building fees in the state of Colorado. In fact, when it comes to single-family homes, we have the lowest fees in the state, and compared to most of the other building departments, it's not even close.
Our low fees allow people to build and construct things at a reduced cost, and we've been able to increase efficiency throughout the years to be able to match the revenue that we receive. And the fact that we can offer outstanding service at a reduced fee over other building departments just makes us that much better, and we're very proud of that here at Regional Building.
It takes everyone in the community to keep our homes, schools, hospitals, offices, retail stores, and other buildings safe for public use. Building codes and safe construction practices help make it all possible. We hope to build on those safe practices today through education. The more informed homeowners and contractors are, the smoother the building process will go and the safer our community will be. Again, thank you for coming to our open house. We hope you enjoy this class, and we look forward to working with you on future projects.
All right, so a couple things before I turn things over to the experts. So we are recording this class, so we encourage you guys to ask questions as we go. But if you do, just we ask that you raise your hand, and we're going to run a mic over to you guys so we can have it recorded. It's not so much so we can actually hear you. It's a pretty small room. Everybody can hear everybody, but it's for our recording so we can use this at a later date. You guys all are loaded up with some RBD swag in front of you. You're more than welcome to take those. Those are for you. We also have some comment cards that we'll ask you, and I'll remind you to fill those out at the end. All the feedback that you can give us, we appreciate it. So my name is Greg Dingrando. As you saw in the video, I'm Regional Buildings Public Information Officer. So I will now turn it over to John Welton. He is our Deputy Building Official, Head of Inspections, and he'll be kind of leading the way, and we also have a couple other folks that might chime in as well. So John, after you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. So for those of you that sat through the accessibility class earlier, I'll go ahead and apologize now that you're stuck with me again. But good news is we do have a couple of disciplines to talk about today. So we've got Jack Arrington, our Chief Mechanical Plumbing Inspector, who will be going over the mechanical questions and that you might have and the code changes. And we've got Joel Segura, our Senior Plumbing Inspector, who will be covering a little bit of the plumbing topics that are going to affect you, which are part of the new energy code that was adopted June 1st of last year. So I'm going to grab this little clicker. We've tried to minimize in this class the amount of slides that we're actually going to go through. Our goal with this class and the slides is big ticket items. So draw your attention to some of the most significant changes that would have occurred in the adoption of the 2015 IRC and the 2015 International Energy Code. Hopefully, by focusing on those big ticket items, and again, these big ticket items are some of the ones that we've seen the most rejections on over the first couple of months of the year. So the implementation date was June 1st of last year for the code change. We did give a grace period up till December 1st. So if a project required a plan submittal up until December 1st, you had an option on which code you wanted to submit under, and then that would have determined how the permit was issued. So again, some of these items are going to focus on big significant changes, and the other flip side of that is over the first couple of months since the December 1st deadline, just a couple of the most frequent items that we have seen on the inspection side that have been rejected. So this class is really just going to focus on 3 code books. The 2017 Pikes Peak Regional Building Code, which is available for free on our website, or you can purchase a bindered copy if you would like from licensing. I think they're $11 a piece or something like that. I would go for the free PDF download over the website, though, if I were y'all. 2015 IRC and the 2015 International Energy Code. So one of the significant changes from the 2009 IRC to the 2015 IRC that is going to affect construction is the wind speed change from nominal to ultimate. Now, I know this sounds like a really big deal, but it's not. Under the 2009, we were under a 100 mile an hour nominal wind speed. So 100 ASD, if you will. Under the 2015 IRC, with that adoption, we've moved to 130 mile an hour ultimate wind speed. So what does that really mean? Nothing. Really, it means nothing. So the very long, laborious process and answer is, this is all a math formula. ASD takes the reduction on the front end. V ultimate takes a reduction on the back end. 130 mile an hour ultimate wind speed actually converts to 100.6 nominal ASD. So really there's no change. The big thing is all of your plans, all of your truss design details that you have in the field for our field inspectors to come out and do a frame inspection have to reference the new 130 mile an hour ultimate exposure C category. So again, not much of a change from a true wind speed, but it's going to involve some changes on how you document your plans and the truss design details that you're going to have in the field. So you definitely want to make sure you're working with your truss engineer to make sure that they're correctly labeling those TDDs that are getting sent to the field along with that shop drawing for your truss layout. Any questions on this? Yes?
Will this conversion also apply to roofing regulations as well too?
Yes. So most, at least up until 2017, 2018, most roofing manufacturers were testing on the ASD standard wind speed. The IRC does provide a conversion table. So as long as we can go to the ASTM results for testing on shingles, let's say that your shingles, the majority of dimensional shingles, the majority of your stamped steel shingles, like a Decra or a Roser product, generally those are still tested to ASD standards, but they're tested to 110 mile an hour. And so if we actually went through the conversion table, 110 mile an hour ASD is actually going to get us up around 142 miles an hour V ultimate, which is above and beyond the code requirement. So the only thing so far that we have found that is not meeting that test requirement is some very lower end 3 tabs. Okay? Yeah. Is there another question? I thought I saw a second hand. All right, any other questions on the wind speed? Perfect. So another more significant change in the 2015 IRC is going to be the requirement for underfloor protection. This one, a lot bigger deal than the wind speed, to be honest with you. Given that the wind speed really wasn't that big of an impact from the design standpoint, just some paper changes, this is actually going to create changes in the field. So the 2015 IRC in section R302.13 has a new requirement for fire protection of floors. So just in case everybody can't read it, I'll quickly go through and read it for you. Floor assemblies that are not required elsewhere in the code to be fire resistance rated shall be provided with a 1/2-inch gypsum wallboard membrane, 5/8 structural panel membrane or equivalent on the underside of floor framing members. Penetrations or openings for ducts, vents, electrical outlets, lighting devices, luminaries, wire speakers, et cetera, shall be permitted. And then we have a couple of exceptions. Number 1, floor assemblies located directly over a space protected by an automatic sprinkler system. And that sprinkler system would have to be installed in accordance with IRC section 2904. And then we have a caveat to that one, which I'll cover in just a minute. Exception number 2 has been deleted and replaced with a local RBC amendment to read floor assemblies located directly over a crawl space. And I'll go into a little bit more detail on that one. Number 3, portions of floor assemblies can be unprotected where complying with the following. The aggregate area of the unprotected area is no more than 80 square feet. Fire blocking in accordance with 302.11.1 installed along the perimeter of the unprotected area. So there's 2 parts to actually that exception. And number 4, wood floor assemblies using dimensional lumber or structural composite lumber equal to or greater than 2" by 10" nominal, so 2 by 10s. So let's take this from the top. Over the course of the 2015 IRC getting written, there's a lot of national meetings, there's a lot of lobbyists involved, and at the end of the day, this code section came to be. So let's say in the theory of house catches fire, first responders arrive at the front door, and they go in and are searching for occupants of the house. This provides an extra level of protection to those first responders going into a burning house with the anticipation that once the fire starts, that first responder knows I have X amount of time where I can go in, search for occupants without feeling like the floor underneath me is compromised. So, rationale behind the code, and now how do we do it? So we have a couple of different options. First option is, and I'll give an example of single-story rancher over an unfinished basement. All right, we're only talking unfinished areas. So if we have a finished basement going in, you're done because you've already got half-inch drywall on the ceiling. So let's say single-story rancher over an unfinished basement. How do we protect that floor? First option is half-inch drywall. Install half-inch drywall at the ceiling, and we're done. It is not a true rated assembly, all right? What they're asking for is fire resistance rating. So this is a prescriptive rating. So we're not looking for a 1-hour floor ceiling assembly. Half-inch drywall does not have to be taped and mudded, and any penetrations in that ceiling do not have to be protected. So if we've got ductwork, if we've got can lights, even a keyless luminary, if we've got a plumbing stack coming down through that ceiling, it doesn't require protection like it would in a lot of commercial applications. 5/8 wood structural panel is another option. So basically 5/8 plywood. Might be a little bit more difficult to work the 5/8 plywood than the half-inch drywall. Let's say since December 1st, we've issued approximately 1,000 single-family home permits. On those 1,000 single-family home permits, not a single person has used the 5/8 structural panel option. So if that tells you anything. Or equivalent. This is one that I would like to spend just a little bit of time on because or equivalent gives us as the building department a little bit of flexibility to work with you as design professionals and as contractors. So if there is a product out there that has been tested and approved in this type of use and for this type of fire protection, we can use that. You've got to work through us. If it's a product that we already have on file and you know that we have it on file, use it and we're good to go. There are other products that might require an alternative material and method request to get approved. We're willing to work through that if you're willing to work through and put the packet together for us. So one that there's a couple of contractors that are using in town, the no burn product. So no burn is a tested product. They have test criteria already on file nationally. So in order for that product to be approved here locally, all they had to do was submit their test criteria to us, their ES report, and it's approved. It can be used because it specifically says in their test criteria that it is tested for use in this code section. It meets the prescriptive requirements. So that's an example of the or equivalent. Going down to exception number 1, floor assembly is located directly over a space provided with an automatic sprinkler system. So 2904 of the IRC gives us criteria on how to do a residential sprinkler system. That is a very robust system for what we're trying to accomplish here. So if you build within the city limits of Colorado Springs Fire has actually worked up their own design for what you can use in this application if you so choose to do that sprinkler option. Again, that's up to you. It's up to you as the builder on how you want to protect that floor system. But if you want to do a sprinkler system and you don't want to go as robust as 2904 would make you, you can work with the Colorado Springs Fire Department, get that design system from them, and submit that into your plan pack. So the big one is going to be number 2, where we actually deleted and rewrote the amendment that you see there in red. Floor assemblies located over a crawl space are exempt. Doesn't matter if you put your water heater, your furnace, any type of appliance in that crawl space. If you're building over a crawl space, and crawl space as defined in the regional building code to be no higher than 5 feet, so we can eventually turn it into habitable space. No higher than 5 feet, it's a crawl space. You don't have to protect that floor system. And again, doesn't matter what you're putting in there. The original unamended version, floor assemblies located directly over a crawl space, not intended for storage or fuel-fired appliances. So that would have been pretty difficult. You're doing a 36-inch crawl space, and the unamended code says if you're putting your fuel-fired furnace or water heater in there, now you've got to put sheetrock, 5/8 structural panel, sprinkler, something like that. So working with the fire department, we were able to come up with the exception that you see written as an amendment. Any questions on that? Hopefully everybody by now has this one figured out and you know what direction they're moving forward. But in the event that you haven't come across it yet and you do run into any questions, our plan review department is here to answer any questions for you when you start submitting that plan, or get in touch with any of the rest of us and we'll try and give you some options or explain those options to you as best we can. Now, along with code changes, you don't always see codes get more restrictive. Periodically during, a new code cycle, they actually lax up on some requirements. And just wanted to bring this one to everybody's attention because this is something that will make life a little bit easier, especially on basement finishes. So one area where we actually saw a reduction in requirements in the 2015 IRC is in ceiling heights in basements where we have drop soffits. So under the 2009 IRC, basements that had drop beams, girders, minimum ceiling height under that drop beam or girder was 6'8". Under the 2015 IRC, that's actually been reduced down to 6'4". Now, ceiling height is still required to be the same, 7 foot. But we're able to drop those soffits down a little bit further to 6'4" now in the 2015 IRC. Historically, one of the most numerous variances that we usually have seen over the course of a year is ceiling height variances for basement finishes. The house was built in the 70s, the 80s. It was designed, with the right anticipated ceiling height, but not the right anticipated, height for the trunk lines, plumbing stacks that came down and turned. So this gives us a little bit more flexibility now in the field from the standpoint of you don't necessarily always have to worry about the variance now. Those extra 4 inches really do help out when it comes to ceiling heights and drop beams and soffits. Any questions there? Yes? Oh. Glad you remembered.
Yeah, I got it. Oh, what's the maximum width of soffits?
I'll come back and get the microphone now. So maximum width of the soffit is going to be no more than 50% of the ceiling area. So that is also a little bit of a change from previous codes where we had a limitation of 8 feet or no more than 50% of a ceiling. So in this particular case, maximum width is going to be, you're limited to that ceiling area. You cannot soffit more than 50% of the ceiling area. In every room, you're going to have to maintain code compliant ceiling height for at least 50% of that room. Good question. Anything else? All right. Okay, so for our roofing contractors, one change that, well, a couple of changes that actually did occur for our roofing contractors in Chapter 9. Previously, in the 2011 version of the Pikes Peak Regional Building Code, which is our local adopted code, we had an amendment that allowed 20-inch valley metal. So when we started doing our review of the 2015 IRC, we noticed that there was really only one place that talked about valley metal as it related to the charging language. And nowhere could we find a reference back to 20-inch. So we started doing a little bit more research, went into top 5 shingle manufacturers, top 5 steel panel manufacturers, and noticed that what they had finally done was caught the code up to the manufacturer's specs. So we've removed the amendment to allow 20-inch valley metal to be used, and the code requirement is now black and white out of the code, which matches the manufacturer's specs. Your valley metal must be 24-inch metal or 36-inch rolled roofing that also includes, a lot of people know it as ice and water shield. It's a self-adhered polymer mod bit. That's an allowed valley material. If you want to double them up and you want to do ice and water and valley metal, that's okay. At a minimum, what we're looking for is at least 36-inch self-adhered polymer mod bit or 24-inch valley metal. So that's, it's a pretty significant change. We did give everyone a grace period to be able to use up that 20-inch metal that everybody had in stock. I believe we gave about a 90-day grace period on that, but that time has come and gone. So moving forward, any roofing permits, 24-inch metal or 36-inch ice and water shield. The other change that occurred, which has been in place probably for 15 years on the commercial side, is the requirement of drip edge. So drip metal is now required on all residential jobs, which lines it up with the manufacturer specs and lines it up with the International Building Code. There is specific criteria for drip metal. So it has to at least reach 2 inches back onto the decking, and it has to have felt run specifically over the top of the drip metal if it's on an eave, or under the drip metal if it's on a rake. So for our roofing contractors in here, pay really close attention. We have seen a couple of projects where, you know, the drip metal's just getting put up there and the felt's getting put over it all the way. So that will be a rejection because the code is specific on how the felt needs to be either underneath or over the drip metal. So it's got to be over on the eaves, underneath on the rakes. Any questions there? All right. So here's my segue over to Jack. One of probably the biggest changes on our end with this most recent code adoption that impacts 1 and 2 family homes is this is the very first time that regional building has adopted IRC chapters 13 through 33. So previous to this code, you would have built the house with the IRC, the 2009 IRC. You would have put in your mechanical per the 2009 International Mechanical Code. Your fuel gas would have been regulated by another book. Plumbing would have been regulated by another book. This way, it's self-contained. Everything that you need to build a single-family home, with the exception of the energy code, is in one book. Hopefully, this has been a little bit easier and streamlined the process and made some of the requirements for single-family homes not as laborious as trying to build a commercial project. So with that in mind, I'll turn it over to Jack to cover some of the more significant mechanical changes.
Okay, one of our big changes on mechanical going to the IRC was the whole house ventilation system, which seems to, is figuring out how we want to do this whole house ventilation system. And it can be done with exhaust fans, or it can be done with makeup air or intake air to the return on your furnace system. So you have a couple of choices. We're seeing it done both ways. We're seeing more of the intake into the returns on the furnace. If you do a 6-inch outside air into the return on your furnace, that counts as 90 CFM for your outside, for your whole house ventilation air. The other part of that is you have to have a switch, a system control, as you see from the bottom there comment, that you have to have a control to shut this system off. We get a lot of questions about that control. And one of my senior inspectors came up with one of the best reasons for having to have that control. We had the fires here at one time in Black Forest and over here on the west side of town. And if you had that whole house ventilation system as an intake and you're sucking that smoke in, you might want a way to shut that off while that fire's going on, you think? So I used to tell people that one of my reasons that you might want to do it was to match what old code was. Your whole house ventilation used to be just windows that you could open. But you had the option of shutting your windows. You didn't have to leave them open all the time. So to me, kind of the same difference, you know. If you live in a part of town where you get skunks, we have that during a certain part of the year, you might want to shut that system off to get that out of the house. So there's some good reasons in this whole house ventilation for doing what we do. Now again, that can be done with that makeup air into the return, or it can be done with exhaust fans. We have some contractors who are using the exhaust fan in a laundry room or a central part of the house that does the amount of CFM they need to do the whole house. And then they have their control for that fan with markings on it that says whole house ventilation control. And that's allowed, and it's all exhaust then. Or you can mix them up. You can have part of it done by exhaust and part of it done by makeup air. If you get a house big enough where you need it all, you can do it that way. There is a chart up here. I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time getting in a spot where I can see this up there. This chart is in the International Residential Code, and it gives you the square footage of the house and the number of bedrooms, and then how many CFM you got to be able to move to meet your whole house ventilation. So, and it's a small number if you're going to run it full time, and that's the way most people are putting it in. Now, you can put it in as an intermittent system and control it that way, but then you got to use the bottom part of this chart and do your multiplication of what you're trying to get on those. If we took a house in that 1,500 to 300 square, or I'm sorry, 1,500 to 3,000 square foot area with 2 to 3 bedrooms, we would have 60 CFM we got to move. But if we only wanted to run our whole house ventilation system as an intermittent piece for a quarter of an hour out of each hour, we'd have to move 240 CFM. Whereas we could put a fan in that moves 60 CFM and leave it run all the time, and then if you wanted it off, you could shut it off with the override switch. So this has lots of options in it that you can use. And I think most of you have gotten that figured out now pretty good. We're not having quite as many questions on it because we've found ways to make it all work out for you. Is there any questions about that? I like that because that usually brings me a lot right there. So the other thing that we got a new piece that goes along with our plans for those of you that work in plans. For the exhaust fans, the kitchen hoods, all the different things you're going to put in that will exhaust air from this house. We need you to fill this out with your plan when you come in for plan review for that house with the fans you think you're going to use. There's a couple of reasons. We have boxes over here on the right, or parentheses. We want you to mark the ones that you're using for your whole house ventilation. Now, you're going to have more fans than that in your bathrooms and stuff, but we need those CFMs so that our inspectors can look at that when they're out there inspecting that house, because you got to size those ducts by the CFM of those fans. So when they're looking at the duct sizes, if they don't have this sheet, they're going to have to partial your HRR, and then you're going to have them called back another day, and that just slows your job down, and we don't want to do that. So by filling this out, it may gain you a day on inspections and getting that job, keeping that job moving. Because we like to see that job move forward too. We're really not in it to hold you up. Down at the bottom of this, we want you to indicate the ventilation control, if you know. If you don't know what your ventilation control is going to be, you know, is it going to be a switch in the basement? Is it going to be a switch upstairs? Is it going to be in the coat closet? We want to know where it's at if you know. If you don't know, just NA it, and we'll be asking as we go along where that's at, and we'll have to know by final where it's going to be, that main control switch to turn the whole house ventilation system on. And we ask you to mark, is it going to be a constant or an intermittent? And again, most of what we're seeing is constant. Any questions? Okay. The next thing is the clothes dryer. This ran into a issue when we first started into this new code adoption because we were asking for fasteners on putting that duct together for the clothes dryer. A lot of you didn't like that because trying to find a screw an 1/8 inch long was basically impossible. 1/4 inch long was impossible. We found out the shortest you could get was 3/8. That's going to go into that duct a little more than 1/8 of an inch. So you could use the pop rivets, but not very many people like using pop rivets anymore. So we got this study in code, and we found that the mechanical code and the IRC had a conflict. So we made a policy, and this policy is on our website. The policy simply gives you a choice of using one code or the other. If you use the IRC, you're going to go at 12-foot intervals on your supports, and you're going to have to fasten your joints. If you use the mechanical code, you're going to go at 4-foot supports, and you'll have to use no fasteners to fasten the duct, just the tape and or mastic, whichever you use. Essentially, all it did is it put you back to where you could do it as you was doing it in the 09 code. So you don't have anything different on it. You support it every 4 foot. Don't use fasteners on the joints. Just tape it. You got to tape or mastic either way you do it. But if you do 12-foot supports, you will have to put screws or rivets in those joints for us. Yes, sir.
So you are allowing the 3/8 screws, is that correct?
You can use the 3/8 screws if you want, yes.
If we went the IRC method at 12
Yes.
feet, you're going to allow 3/8 even though it's more than 1/8 into the pipe?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
It's the shortest you can get. Any other questions? Oh, John has this thing real fancy, and I'm not a fancy guy, so you'll have to bear with me. Okay, our exhaust ducts. I talked about the exhaust ducts on these bath fans and that we needed to know what your CFMs were. This is where you see it. This chart is in Chapter 15 of our IRC, and you'll see on 3-inch duct up there, I know John had a little light on here. Well, on 3-inch duct up here for a 50 CFM fan, you can't even use it on this flex duct side. On this side, for the smooth wall duct, for a 50 CFM fan, you can run 5 feet, so you better be pretty close to the outside wall. So you're going to be looking at 4-inch on most of the stuff you do. You're still pretty limited. Whoops, I hit the wrong button then. Jump this way back. John may have to come and help me now. There we go. Sorry about that. But anyway, as you look at this, you'll see these are pretty short distances. You'll also see that footnote C says that elbows in all this stuff counts as 15 feet. So you'll want to be kind of talking to your electricians, who typically are the ones who mount your bathroom fans, to get them to turn that so that that duct opening is pointed to the outside wall. You want to keep that as straight as you can, because you put 2 elbows on there to get out of that can, that's 30 feet. And if you're limited to 50 feet, you could be pretty tight on getting out of there. So that's something to pay attention to, is the elbows and stuff in that. So this chart, I tell people, you know, and I've done it for a few folks that have come in and talked to me about it. I've made copies of it where they can carry it with them. It just makes it a lot easier for your installer out there to be able to look at that and see what he's doing. And I believe we're back to John a little bit here.
All right. Oh, I'm sure it'll come back to you a little bit there, Jack. All right, so any questions so far on what we might have covered on the building side, mechanical side? Excellent. All right, so probably the code that impacted building the most as it relates to 1 and 2 family dwellings with the most recent code change from last year is the International Energy Conservation Code. So for those of you that work with our plan review department, this will look familiar to you. This is our new 2015 IECC Energy Code Compliance certificate sheet. So this is where you're going to tell us one of the 6 options that you're going to choose to meet energy code compliance on the new build. The prescriptive method, U-factor alternative, total UA alternative, res check, simulated performance, or ERI, the energy rating index. So all 6 of these have different requirements and different paths that you can use to prove that the home works. The 2 that we see the most of are generally prescriptive and simulated performance. Prescriptive means you're going to follow directly what the code says. You're going to follow all the tables and all the requirements of the energy code as it relates to wall insulation, roof insulation, floor insulation if applicable, under slab insulation, window compliance for all glazing and fenestration. And that's going to be where the easy way to think of it is how much solar heat gain is the house going to be allowed to get from the windows. So prescriptive is least amount of work on the front end for your plan submittal, all right? You don't have to provide us any supporting documentation like you would, say, if you did the ERI, the energy rating index. This means that you have to get a qualified third party that is approved by the building department to use design criteria and utility cost from other areas of the country with our same climate zone and prove that you can build that same house here and it will work. Haven't seen that option too much yet. Simulated performance, the other path, well, this means that you're going to use a design professional and they're going to design the house to meet compliance. Now, the difference on the simulated performance, you can give and take a little bit. So let's say the end goal is to make a house that will pass a blower door test, that will pass a third-party insulation certification. This is an option to where your design professional comes up with some ideas. All right, I think if we over-insulate the walls, we can under-insulate the foundation, keep the roof insulation the same, provide really good windows, and still make it work. So this is where at the end of the project, we're actually going to ask for that documentation to prove that it works. With this prescriptive table, we did have a couple of changes. So again, if you're going that prescriptive path, this is the table in the energy code that is going to tell you what R value and what U factor have to be in place for wall cavities, floors, roof ceilings. And a couple of them did increase over the previous year or the previous code cycle. So we're in climate zone 5B, and you'll notice that like one of the increases was our roof and ceiling insulation. Used to, that was R38, now it's R49. One amendment that we did add was to keep basement walls at 1013 versus the unamended 1519. And I think we had pretty good grounds for doing that. We did a lot of research, looked at a lot of testing, and the numbers we were coming up with, the difference between this insulation on a basement and what the code was asking for, that was about an 82-year payback to put that extra insulation in there. Didn't really feel like, I mean, I'm not going to live in my house for 82 years, so we didn't think most people would either. So we thought that was a fair compromise to reduce that basement R value back to the level it was in the 2009 Energy Code and just kind of keep that standard moving forward. One change that is mandatory now on all single-family homes and single-family attached, since we're talking about both of them, is blower door testing. So every home built in El Paso County now has to have a blower door test performed. Documentation is going to be required at the time of the building final inspection to show proof of test and that the air leakage rate is no greater than 5 air changes an hour. So the 5 air changes an hour, that is also an amendment that we were able to put in to the regional building code. Unamended for this climate zone, that requires 3 air changes an hour. Now we're getting into a very tight house. We felt like the flexibility going up to 5 air changes an hour, one, it's going to help the learning curve. The majority of builders that were building in this area that never have built outside in another area, a lot of them hadn't performed blower door tests before. So they had no earthly idea where that house was going to fall on that initial test. You're kind of rolling the dice at that point. I think I'm building a tight house, and then you do a blower door test on it, and it hits at a 9.2. Well, that's got to really tighten up to even be able to get down to a 5. So we felt like this was a fair compromise with the fact that we went from no requirement of blower door testing to all of a sudden full-blown blower door testing. So a couple of things to keep in mind is we do have to have blower door testing, It does have to be presented to the building inspector at the time of building final, and it has to hit at no more than 5 air changes an hour. Any questions on that? Perfect. So one of the other codes that may impact how you're actually designing your mechanical room, or how you're actually going to be constructing your mechanical equipment room, is thermal separation of rooms containing fuel burning appliances. Now, the good news is we were able to put in one extra amendment right here, but I'm going to turn it back over to Jack and let him discuss this aspect of the energy code.
Okay. On new homes is what this applies to. When you're starting on a new home, you're going to be picking your equipment that you're going to put in this home. If you decided to use all equipment that uses, draft hood equipment, uses combustion air from inside the home, if you're setting it up to where you would have to bring outside air in to get enough without doing infiltration on that, you can't go through the insulation envelope with your outside air for combustion air. So what we have seen on this is we see a lot more direct vent furnaces going in, and then a water heater that is a draft hood water heater, which is a fine way to go because your house typically has enough infiltration to take care of that water heater. At times it has enough to take care of both, furnace and the water heater, depending on sizing and how well insulated and stuff. You might be able to get them both off of the inside combustion air through infiltration, which would be your 50 cubic feet per 1,000 BTUs. Now, a lot of people are confused by this amendment that was put on there. It says fuel burning appliance is equipped with a listed power vent approved for specific application as approved by the building official. That got kind of misworded a little bit, and it has to be approved by the building official, which would be the authority, one of us here at Regional Building. If you put a power vent in there, it's not really a power vent. We want a direct vent system, meaning you're pulling outside air for combustion directly to the unit, a two-pipe system, direct vent. That's what that amendment was for. I have a lot of folks who are trying to throw in a power vented water heater that's a one-pipe system and thinking that's going to meet this amendment, but it doesn't. It has to be a direct vent piece to meet that amendment. Again, you don't even have to go to that amendment because a water heater, even a power vent water heater, typically you'll be able to get enough combustion air for it through infiltration without cutting a hole through the insulation envelope. So we haven't ran into this too much where they're trying to isolate that room to get outside air brought in for combustion. I may have confused that a little. Any questions about that? Okay. Moving on, building cavities cannot be used for ducts or return air plenums. This is another one that has been a hard hit for home builders because you have to duct all those returns. Now, mostly what we seen was floor joists being used and wall joist cavities being used for return air, and we no longer have that capability. We have to duct those. And that was brought in by the energy code. So that, if you got questions, I'll take them. There's not a whole lot more I can say about that. You just can't use those cavities anymore. Supply and return air ducts in attics located above the building thermal envelope shall be insulated to a minimum of R8 where they're 3 inches or larger in diameter. We very seldom see under 3 inches except on the high volume units that you put in, which typically come with their own instructions for how to insulate them and stuff too now. So, and we don't see a whole lot of those, but we will work with you on those when you're doing those, the high velocity systems with the 2-inch ducts. For your 3-inch in diameter and greater, we'll be looking for R8 on return and supply. The big question I get off of that one is return air. We have a lot of you who do jumper ducts for return air, where you jump from one room to another room to get a path. That return duct in an attic doesn't have to be tested. The only return air duct when we talk, and this is talking insulation, but I'm going to move on into leakage because that comes up along with this a lot of times. When we ask for a duct leakage test on duct in an attic, that is ductwork that is connected to your air handling system. If it doesn't connect to your air handling system, then we don't need to test on it. Okay?
Hey, Jack, I got one question for you.
Yeah.
Just backing up on the other two items with the combustion air first. How does that apply on a basement finish? With combustion air coming in that's already existing, penetrating the envelope, say to the return air?
Okay, we have a policy in place that was put out by Jay in-house from plans, our deputy building official. This, again, for the isolated room only applies to new construction, new homes. Basement finishes are not applicable to that code. So even on a house that's built and finished today, and they decide to do the basement next week, they can cut that hole then and get their combustion air from outside. Doesn't make a lot of sense, but we can do that. So this does not apply to remodels, additions, only applies to new homes 101 permits.
And then one more, Jack, is I had a question with the return air ducting, not being able to use cavities, will that also apply on a basement finish?
This applies to the basement finish, yes.
Okay.
So you can't use your cavities when you're doing a basement finish or a remodel additions. This applies to all. It's only the combustion air and isolated room that does not.
If we're using outside air tied to our return air for ventilation, can we also count that as combustion air at the same time? Use it twice?
Not on a new house. On a new house, that's going to be your whole ventilation system, and they don't allow you to use it for combustion air. On a remodel or basement finish, yes. Other questions? Hot water pipe. This has Joel's name written all over it. Joel is our senior plumbing inspector, so I'm going to let him talk to you with this one.
Grab this paper. Grab my little cheat sheet here.
That computer screen has it up there too.
Which one's the pointer?
Red one up here and then this little forward.
Okay, so 2015 International Energy Conservation Code made some changes to your hot water piping insulation and your recirc systems. So we have we've had lots of questions about recirc lines for your new home. We don't have any requirements at this time to install a recirc system. So there used to be a 50-foot rule. If you get 50 feet away from a water source, like a hot water heater, your fixture is 50 feet away from it, you would be required to put a recirc line in. That is no longer a requirement. So first and foremost, you don't have to install the recirc pump, okay? But if you do decide to install a recirc line or recirc pump, you will have to insulate that line. So that's something that builders like to use as a selling point, is saying, you know, we've got the recirc system that we're going to install as an option for energy conservation. A lot of people like that. Keep in mind you'll have to insulate that line. There's a couple ways that you would not have to insulate that line. One of those ways would be is if it's what's called a demand system. A demand system is actually a recirc system that uses the cold line, and it ties your recirc right back into it, and it would not require insulation. We don't see very many demand systems, okay? And if you have a pump with a timer on it that is an auto-adapt type of pump, and you wanted to not insulate that line, you run a dedicated recirc line, you can get an alternate method and material in plan review stating all the information about the pump that you're planning to use, and if plan review sees that it meets the criteria of automatically turning on and turning off, then you can possibly get away with not having to insulate that recirc line at that time. Any questions on that portion of it so far? Clear as mud? Okay. So I've got a handout that if anybody's interested or have questions, you can always you can call or email me. I'll be more than happy to get it to you. It kind of gives you a picture of what a demand system compared to a non-demand system looks like, just your basics. It also gives you the criteria for insulation, when it's required, when it's not required. So one of the other big changes in the energy code is when it comes to your hot water piping. So this is not your recirc line. This is just all of your hot water piping that's 3/4 pipe size and bigger. So there's now a requirement to insulate all of the hot water piping if you choose what's called the prescriptive path, which John talked about that earlier. When you fill out your energy code certificate in the beginning of your plan review, then you'll have to choose whether it's going to be prescriptive or performance or whatever. If you choose prescriptive, that's the only time that you're going to be required to insulate your hot water piping. So you'll want to keep that in mind when you're putting your bids together, because that's going to come into play. But if you don't choose prescriptive, it's not going to require any insulation on the hot water piping. So there's two different times when insulation is going to be required: on the recirc line, and if you choose the prescriptive path for hot water piping. Okay? Let's see. And that basically covers all that. And like I said, if you have questions, you can feel free to call, email me, or Jack, and we can get you a little more information if you need it.
Always, if you have questions after you leave here, you can always contact us and ask us questions. That's what we do, is try to answer those questions for you.
Do you by chance have a handout of this on the website?
Do we by chance have a what?
A handout on the website?
Joel's got his handout there, and
All the slides on this PowerPoint? I do not believe so.
Joel's old style like me, and we didn't realize that the thing kept going and moving for us. You have to bear with us because we was born before our time, I guess. So I believe that's the end of our discussion, so I'll turn it back to John. Thank you all.
Well, thank you, everybody, for showing up today. Does anybody have any questions that, you might have thought of? It can relate to any of the slides that you've seen today, or it can be something off the wall. We're pretty good with deflecting off the wall questions too, and we might even have an answer.
Try.
All right. Yes.
On the, I think it's R9052 point plus one. No, not one. It's, oh, there it is. the ice and water, and it states from the pitch 812 needs one row of ice and water. On the eaves.
No, that actually is not our code. So the only place currently the code requires ice and water shield is going to be in the valley, if you choose that as the option for valley material, or if the house is above 7,000 feet elevation. So here locally, that's the only places we require ice and water shield. Good question. Anybody else? All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming. I know it's a Friday afternoon at the end of the day, and if y'all are like me, there's a driving range in your future. So again, thanks for coming. If you don't mind taking a minute, there's a survey card in front of you. If you would fill it out. We're always looking for feedback on how we can make these kind of classes better, whether that be more information, less information, or more tailored information. So any feedback you can give us would be great. Outside of that, hope you all have a great weekend, and we look forward to working with you on your upcoming projects. Thank you.